Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we'll be going over Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter 23. This was a decent chapter, and it definitely moves the series in a more unpredictable direction, which is always a good thing. And we really get to see in this chapter as well the perks of being a singularity of fate. The chapter's cover this time around is okay, as we get to see our second cover in the series with Jura directly on it. The first, of course, being chapter 8's art cover. What this particular art is showing is that Jura is expressing through his body language that he is an unstoppable force and that no one even comes close to what he can do in terms of his raw powers and abilities. It also speaks volumes that Jura is not looking directly at the audience, but rather looking above towards the sky. It's basically him saying that I'm superior to everyone and I'm in my own little domain or pocket of power. The art's cover also complements chapter 22's cover because Boruto was directly staring at Jura before that fight, and it was metaphorical because he also wasn't wearing his cape and that he was there to protect his friends and not being the Shadow Hokage. The chapter's title this time around is called The Strong, and I interpreted this title as being part of an old saying that only the strong will survive. I also don't think the title is just referring to Jura's physical strength, but also towards Boruto himself being mentally prepared and ready to fight Jura. This chapter's title is also referring to a character that we will see later on. Okay, with that being said, let's dive right into the review. So we open up the chapter seeing the aftermath of Mitsuki finishing off the claw grind that Ryu summoned several chapters ago. This was expected considering that Mitsuki is pretty powerful for a non-Otsutsuki and non-Uchiha. Konohamaru then shows up to Mitsuki's location. Mitsuki updates Konohamaru about Areya's current whereabouts. Areya apparently headed towards Shinki and Gaara's location off screen in the previous chapter carrying Yodo's body. So the mission in the Hidden Sand Village turned out to be a success after all, despite Konohamaru's mess-ups. Jura permanently lost access to Ryu because Shinki is about to get released from the failed Divine Tree. And by extension, Gaara will also be released from Shinki's sealing jutsu and receive medical attention from his injuries sustained by Matsuri in chapter 15. Which is great because now Kashin Koji and the other singularities have more war assets in the conflicts with the Shinju. Konohamaru goes on to explain Boruto's current situation to Mitsuki. Mitsuki obviously saw Jura arrive in the Hidden Sand Village in the previous chapter through a claw grind, and he knows now that Boruto is directly engaging in battle with Jura. Konohamaru then explains that Boruto told them to meet him at a specific rendezvous point. Mitsuki tells Konohamaru that they should go help Boruto in the fight against Jura. However, Konohamaru makes it perfectly clear. They had their mission to secure the Thorn Soul bulbs. That mission has succeeded. They need to go. Boruto knows what he's doing and they really just need to listen to him. Despite both of these characters not knowing about Boruto's true identity, it's nice to see them trusting Boruto again in a post-omnipotence world. Neither character even questions the other on why they suddenly view Boruto as an ally. Konohamaru didn't see the events between Boruto and Mitsuki in chapter 7 at all, so he doesn't know that the two of them are actually on good terms. He only knows what he saw from chapter 14, even though he's probably suspicious of the activity involving Boruto's escape. I also wanted to point this out. Konohamaru admits that if Boruto did not show up, then he would have died against Matsuri, which is insane to me given that he actually had the chance to finish her off with his giant Rasengan. But we're not going to open that can of worms again. So this means that just like Yodo, Koji was willing to sacrifice Konohamaru so long as it meant that Matsuri and or Ryu's Thorn Soul bulbs were captured during this mission. From what I gathered from Koji's plan, since both Ryu and Matsuri both showed up in the Hidden Sand Village within the actual story, he fully intended on Yodo and Konohamaru dying in most possible futures, which would have led to Sarada and Mitsuki being the ones who actually kill Ryu and Matsuri respectively. I suspect that before Boruto intervened in chapter 21, Konohamaru dies to Matsuri and Mitsuki ends up being the one who kills the remaining claw grind that Ryu summoned earlier in the story, and then he goes on to kill a weaker version of Matsuri. Both Thorn Soul bulbs would have been captured. Sarada reawakens the Mangekyo Sharingan, but 2 shinobi would have died in this process. And Jura also doesn't intervene because he wanted to hunt Boruto over saving his fellow Shinju. So we cut to the next scene as we get to see Boruto quite literally staring death in the face. This isn't even a fight anymore. It stopped being a fight once Boruto used the weaker version of the Rasengan Uzuhiko, and it failed in the last chapter. The situation quickly has turned into a scenario where Boruto needs to survive as long as possible and outsmart Jura in literally any way he can. Unfortunately, it turns out that Boruto got injured in the previous chapter, likely when Jura encapsulated him within the tree branches prior to Boruto attempting to attack him with the weaker version of the Rasengan Uzuhiko. The injury isn't in a vital area, but it's still deep enough to be a problem for Boruto. He can't even stand up straight, and it's heavily implied that because of this injury, Boruto cannot fight Jura at his full power at all. And, things are just not looking good for our protagonist here. Boruto is barely staying alive. It's only thanks to his version of the Flying Raijin that he continues to draw breath. But realistically, he can't keep this up forever, especially now that he's injured. Jura points out a flaw in his own attack patterns, interestingly enough, and he basically says that it takes time to charge a Bijou Bomb, and because of that, Boruto is able to anticipate where Jura is going to attack next and teleport out of the way in time. So Jura comes to the conclusion that it's better to snipe Boruto from long range with a condensed Bijou Bomb, or simply just finish him off with close ranged attacks. It's one thing to be more powerful than your opponent, but if you're predictable, you better believe that a seasoned shinobi like Boruto is going to take full advantage of that. So Jura keeps his word and he proceeds to try to use a condensed version of the Bijou Bomb to snipe Boruto. However, Boruto actually manages to fly away from the attack in time. Jura's attacks are powerful, don't get me wrong, but they're very repetitive. He doesn't have a creative mind like a shinobi does to mix things up. And that's honestly a perfect flaw for his character. He doesn't know how to think outside of the box when it really counts because he lacks life experience, something which Boruto actually has. Jura manages to shoot out yet another Bijou Bomb at Boruto, but thankfully Boruto throws a kunai knife in Jura's direction and he teleports right near Jura. Boruto then prepares to swing his sword to decapitate Jura's head. Jura manages to block Boruto's attempt, and then he tries to stab Boruto in the same area which Boruto has his injury, using his bootlegged Wolverine claw. Boruto manages to use his Flying Raijin to get behind him in time before that could happen. And we start to see the advantage Boruto has over Jura. He's a shinobi, so he's always planning a few steps ahead. The second Boruto used the Flying Raijin to escape getting stabbed by Jura, he managed to successfully get near Jura and cut off Jura's foot and lower leg with a backslash, which is highly impressive considering that he can't use his Karma Seal, he's injured, and neither the original Rasengan nor the Uzuhiko are effective against Jura. So Jura and Boruto actually start engaging in melee combat. Boruto, of course, is using Sasuke's sword, and Jura is using his bootlegged Wolverine claws. It's crazy that even though Boruto is extremely skilled, he is no match for Jura in terms of raw strength. He's barely keeping up with Jura. Jura proceeds to then grab Boruto's arm, but before he can do anything, Boruto emits purple lightning from his entire body, which is awesome. I love that this technique is being used more in the manga. This is probably the closest we'll ever see to Boruto actually using something similar to the Chidori because of course he doesn't have a Sharingan. And Kakashi pre-omnipotence would have been so proud to see this because obviously he invented the technique. What's cool too is that Jura actually flinches a little bit when he gets hit with the purple lightning, which is pretty notable considering that the original Rasengan did nothing to Jura in the previous chapter. You can tell that Jura is having the time of his life. Up until now, he's fought a weaker version of Kawaki, a version of Himawari who hasn't fully tapped into the power of the Nine Tails yet, and Weaker Leaf Shinobi, which he killed instantly in Chapter 8 of the series. Boruto is the first person to actually make him try, and unlike the others, Boruto is actually very intelligent and strong. So Jura actually has to think this through. Boruto, on the other hand, is not having as much fun as Jura. He's barely holding on, and he knows now that Koji was 100% right about him not being a match for Jura. But there's something about watching a guy fight an opponent he knows he can't win against and show no signs of fear that really makes me respect this character. Jura proceeds to entertain the idea of clobbering Boruto to death instead of using Bijou bombs because it would be much faster. Jura is also taking sadistic pleasure in seeing Boruto getting sluggish due to his exhaustion and his injury from the previous chapter. Meanwhile, the other members of Team 7 arrive to the spot where Boruto said he'd meet them in the previous chapter. Mitsuki and Konohamaru are confused for why they needed to meet at this specific spot. It's not particularly unique or special from their understanding. Boruto proceeds to continue to get his butt kicked by Jura, and it really feels hopeless at this point. Jura manages to knock Boruto to the ground and use another Bijou bomb. Boruto manages to teleport away, but Jura is so fast that he catches up with Boruto and tries to finish him off. Just like how Boruto predicted Jura's attack pattern, Jura is starting to notice the repetitiveness in Boruto's own teleportation. Boruto manages to block Jura's claw attack in time. Jura was trying to strike Boruto so hard that he ended up cracking Sasuke's sword. And I'm like, not the sword, Jura. Like, come on, man. But obviously, it will get fixed later because in the first scene of the series, it's intact and it seems perfectly fine. But geez, like, come on, man. Boruto gets knocked around so much that he ends up becoming unconscious. And Jura is fascinated that despite him not being awake and defeated, he's still holding on to Sasuke's sword. So this is Boruto's first official loss in the series, and if it had to be done by anyone, the strongest antagonist in this franchise should be the one to do it. So I'm okay with that. And things are so bad that Ada doesn't even want to continue to watch the battle with her Senringan because she doesn't want to experience Boruto dying. Honestly, when I looked at this panel with Kashin Koji, I at first thought that he was panicking, wondering to himself how did things go so wrong. But it turns out that wasn't the case at all. Kashin Koji starts to see new possible futures with prescience. Some things we have already witnessed, and a lot of things which have yet to happen. One of the things we see that actually did happen so far is Boruto being unconscious. We also see a panel of Jura holding his hand to his face like he's covering his eye. We also see a shot of what appears to be a Nojin in Orochimaru's hideout. And we see a panel of Himawari looking very concerned at something. What Koji doesn't see is Boruto's death, and he also doesn't see the darkest timeline. Koji points out that this is the first time in 6 days that he's got glimpses of a new future. Koji already knew about the possible future in which Boruto disobeyed his orders and went to the Hidden Sand Village despite Koji saying not to go. And of course Boruto gets killed. But all of what he's seeing now totally contradicts this. So Jura stands over Boruto's body and he knows that the battle is over. But out of respect for Boruto, he's going to wipe him out quickly with a single attack. He flies up into the air and charges yet another Bijou bomb. I actually believe this was how Boruto was always meant to die in Koji's original visions from Prescience, if Boruto had gotten himself involved in the mission within the Hidden Sand Village. Jura knows that Boruto isn't going to rat out his accomplice, and he also views Boruto as a legitimate threat, so naturally this was always going to happen if these two crossed paths. Jura is likely banking on code to discover the whereabouts of Kashin Koji at this point. But when all hope seemed lost, Jura gets stabbed by a rod that literally goes through his eye socket. Once I saw this, I already knew what time it was. The most epic shot of the chapter, Kawaki literally stands on Jura's back with his full rod extended through his face. And honestly, this is incredible. I knew Kawaki and Jura would have a rematch at some point in the story, but the fact that it's this soon is crazy. What's also very interesting to me is that Kawaki is wearing clothes similar to what he wore in part 1 of the series. Not only that, but he's also wearing a hidden leaf headband on his waist. This has to be the metallic part of the headband that Boruto gifted to him in chapter 60 of part 1. I'm almost sure of it. And that headband symbolizes their bond as brothers and the moment in which Kawaki was truly accepted into the Uzumaki household in the manga. Which tells me that he's not just there to kill Jura just for the sake of his own selfish goals. A part of him is there to actually save his brother. This is what really makes Kawaki a complex character. Yes, Kawaki still wants Boruto dead, as he pointed out to Amato in chapter 19, but he's also going to settle the score with Boruto once the Shinju and Code have been dealt with first. He doesn't hate Boruto, he just wants a world free of Otsutsuki threats, including himself. But this gives me a glimmer of hope that Boruto can change Kawaki's mind in the future because their bond isn't truly dead. Koji starts seeing more and more new possible futures. We see one future where Jura is back in the dimension where the other Shinju are located and he's clearly missing his eye. Which means that Kawaki actually manages to force Jura to retreat in a possible future in the story. And I believe that this particular future coming into existence has a very high probability rate, considering that the other events that Koji is currently witnessing wouldn't be able to happen if Jura does not retreat from the hidden sand. We also get to see a quick panel of Mamushi. I think he's going to have his own separate agenda from Jura, and he may be the next big threat among the Shinju, especially if Jura needs some time to recover or regroup or whatever he has to do. We also see a panel of Hidari extending his hand out to something or someone. And then we see a panel with Sarada using her Mangekyo Sharingan again. Unfortunately, we don't see everything that Koji gets to see because we only see what's behind Koji and not the scroll that's directly in front of him. What's very fascinating is that Koji never once saw Kawaki's involvement via prescience in the Hidden Sand Village mission at all. He then comes to the realization that Boruto was the one that set all of this up. And we as an audience know that this happened as early as chapter 15 of the series, particularly the end of the chapter. Boruto turned Kawaki into a singularity of fate when he gave Kawaki information about the idea of removing his limiters that Amato had placed on him. Kawaki would have possibly obtained that power later on in the timeline, but Boruto ensured that Kawaki got that power earlier to help fight against Jura. We also didn't see their entire conversation at the end of chapter 15. Boruto likely told Kawaki about the mission in the Hidden Sand Village prior to Koji telling Shikamaru and by extension the rest of Team 7. Boruto, being a singularity, took his knowledge from potential futures and engineered a better present, which in turn created more new possible futures. And this is consistent to what Koji said about singularities in chapter 16. The more singularities there are, the greater the odds you will diverge from the timeline that you were originally anticipating. If everyone has intel on things that should happen, then they'll behave and do things differently, meaning that it will be much difficult in controlling which way the timeline goes and even making predictions. That's why Koji told Boruto there should be as little singularities as possible. And we're witnessing this firsthand with Boruto and Kawaki messing with the timeline. Koji did not anticipate that. Kawaki ends up using Sukuna Hikona to shrink himself and put some distance between him and Jura. He then shoots out more chakra rods, piercing Jura in his upper body. He's fighting exactly like Jigen did in Boruto Part 1. Notice how I said Ishiki in Jigen's body, but not Ishiki himself. Jura may be the strongest character, but Kawaki is quite literally a perfect counter to all of Jura's fighting style and abilities. Claw marks are not going to be enough to save him, and Bijou bombs can be easily dodged by Kawaki. So this is actually going to be a very interesting battle to watch. Jura uses his remaining eye to shoot out a Bijou bomb at Kawaki. Kawaki's reaction time is just as good as Boruto's now, so he quickly sees it coming. Kawaki is so fast that he gets past the Bijou bomb and then uses Hikune Hikona to expand himself right next to Boruto. He tells Boruto at that point to wake up, and even refers to Boruto as bro. Very reminiscent of their dynamic in part 1 of the series. And this honestly is something that Naruto would have wanted to see, and hopefully when Boruto achieves his goal of reuniting the Uzumaki household, Naruto does get to see that. Boruto ends up sarcastically scolding Kawaki for being late, but ultimately his investment in Kawaki actually paid off, because this is a version of Kawaki that was created through Boruto's knowledge through Koji's prescience and him being a singularity. And the best part about all of this is that even though they have drastically different ideas for the future, it doesn't change the fact that in this moment, they're brothers and they need each other more than ever. That's what makes them stronger. And I absolutely love this. The characters have an advantage over the antagonists of the story. And it's something that Kashin Koji pointed out in Two Blue Vortex chapter 13. That concept that gives them the advantage is intel. Jura is confused. He's already fought Kawaki in chapter 8, and Kawaki lost miserably. So how come all of a sudden Kawaki has so much more power than he did before? Prescience really is a life hack. Honestly, it would come in handy for a lot of people's real lives, including my own. But anyways, Kawaki starts to activate his Karma Seal. And unlike Boruto, he actually has a stable Karma Seal because Ishiki's spirit died in part 1 of the series. Kawaki tells Boruto that he better hold it together because he knows that karma resonance could occur because of what happened in chapter 9. And he basically says that if Momoshiki comes out and you lose control, he's going to kill Boruto on the spot. Kawaki honestly wouldn't have a choice in this particular case because at that point he would have to fight potentially 2 very powerful enemies. So at least he's being very straightforward with Boruto. So the chapter ends with Jura charging at full speed towards Kawaki. Kawaki makes an epic pose and is ready to give it his all in this fight. I don't think Jura will die in the Hidden Sand Village, but this is a perfect scenario for Boruto and having Kawaki be there. He is a walking counter to Jura's abilities, and he can easily distract Jura for a longer period of time. If Boruto has the strength, he could in theory charge a maximum output Rasengan Uzuhiko, basically like the one he used against Hidari in chapter 12 of Two Blue Vortex. I don't see a scenario where Jura would be able to deactivate it in time because of how great the intensity is and the destructive power of the maximum output variants of the Uzuhiko. But we'll have to see. I cannot wait for the next chapter. Until next time, guys.